Hey everyone, Sebastian here from 8base. Today I wanted to walk you guys through a tutorial on how you can create a custom logger, which essentially wraps your serverless functions and allows you to dynamically turn on or turn off verbose logging and really create any type of logger that you want to. So let's dive into it and start playing with some examples. All right, so I'm going to start here in a completely empty 8base functions directory, right? So I could get here with the 8base command line tool by running 8base init, give it a project name, which I'm just calling here logger functions, and then configure a workspace. So I already had this little directory set up, so I'm just going to run 8base configure and make sure that when I end up deploying these functions, they deploy to the appropriate workspace, which in this case is going to be the sandbox workspace. Now, inside of here, I don't have any functions yet, so we're just going to go ahead and create a function. This could be any function type. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to go ahead and run or generate an 8base trigger function, and this is going to be called before user update because that is the default function for triggers, and JavaScript syntax. So let me go ahead and create that. Awesome. So I added the declaration, and oh, it was before user create. So I'm just going to do this to update. So even though we could call the function whatever we want, I like that naming convention personally. Now, once that's created, we now have it here. We have our function. I'm going to erase or delete the example code here. And so we literally have a function that just returns the data it was given. And we can make sure that everything is linked up and working by running the invoke local command, the function name, and that mock, and everything looks like it's working totally fine. So we're set up. Now, what we are going to try to do here is create a function that essentially wraps our serverless function so that then we can perform some type of custom logging. And we're going to build it in a way to where we can dynamically toggle it on and off. This could be a useful tool for debugging. This could be a useful tool for sending logs to a third-party system. There's lots of different use cases that you might want to apply this to. So how we're going to start is we are going to first just write the made-up code for how we want it to work in our function. So I'm going to want to be able to import a function called logger from a local directory called utils, and we're just going to call it logger. And then I'm going to want to use that function to wrap my serverless function. I'm just going to reformat that a little bit. Cool. So no matter what code I write in here now, and the function as I normally use it, it's now wrapped in this logger function. So we need to make sure that the logger function returns the serverless function after performing any items or tasks it wants to do with the same arguments that we would expect this function to be given, and without messing up the whole process. So let's go ahead now and create this utils directory in that logger file. So in the source, I'm actually doing the command line. I'm going to make a new directory in source called utils, and I'm going to add a file to it, source utils, called logger.js. Awesome. And based on this directory structure, I think we just have to go back up 2 levels. Yes, there we go. Cool. So now we are importing nothing from that file because it's empty. So now we have to create a function, which we're going to export. So export a default function. And we know the argument we passed to it is the serverless function, which is in our handler file. So it takes in a function argument. And then inside of here, what we now need to do is make sure that any arguments being passed to the function are still making it all the way through, right? We can't, if we just were to return the function right now, we'd miss out on those arguments. So here what we're going to do is we're going to return another function which spreads out the args, or the arguments that are being received, and then it invokes the function, the serverless function, with those arguments. So with this little setup right here, actually, it's pretty cool. We can go ahead and invoke that function again and see that nothing changed on the behavior of our function. So it's being passed to a serverless function. That function that it returned is being invoked, getting all the arguments from there, and then we are, once again, invoking the serverless function with the arguments that were passed, and everything lines up appropriately. So what's cool about that is now that gives us this space in here to play around with and do whatever we want. So what do we want to do? The first thing we want to do is make sure that we can dynamically essentially turn on or off this function facility or this logger facility. So I'm going to say if something, and then we will have our logger logic or script inside there. Now, a good way to approach this in the console is actually to use environment variables. So in the 8-base console, you will be able to go into your environment variables and set them, turn them on and off, do whatever you need to do. So what we will do here is we access those in variables by process env, and let's just call this verbose logger. Okay, so this would be how we access the environment variable. Now, the environment variable that gets passed, even if we give it a value like true or false, it's going to be a string. So because it is a string, we can't just leave it like this for true or false, because if there's any value set for the verbose logger, it will always go to true. So what we can do instead is do a little regex, says true, and make this case insensitive. So whether or not it's like an uppercase true, a first letter uppercase or downcase, it will just look for whether or not true is in the field. And that's a regex, and so that gives us the test function on that statement, and then we can pass it the value from our environment variable. So inside here, console.log, we can just say logged something, and now we can invoke that locally. So since we have no environment variable set right now, it should not console log our statement. So run that, it didn't. And now instead of setting an environment variable, we can just give it a bang symbol because we know that it'll be the opposite of whatever it is. Run it again, and it logged something. Cool. So now we know inside this logger, we can perform whatever action, whatever logging or actions that we want to perform. Cool. So, but now that we're in there, let's actually explore some of the arguments that were being passed and see how we might want to log those out. So I'm just going to, once again, console.log args and see what's being passed to this function. So I invoke local, and I can see, okay, this first argument is the event argument that gets passed to our serverless functions when we're used to working with them. So it's that guy. And the second one is the context argument, which has our API module on it, our ability to invoke other functions. That's all there. So what we're going to do is let's just unpack that really quickly. So constant event, and then we don't really need to use the context argument, so it's not necessary. So we can actually just do that and get the event variable that that we want to work with. Now, once we have that, let's just say that what we want to do is when verbose login's on, we want to console log out all the data being passed to the function. All right, so if a user is being updated and verbose login's on, we want all the event data to be passed. And that would apply to any function that we use it on, right? So whether it's a user update, a trigger function, or a task function, doesn't really matter. Just any data being passed to our function, we want to know those arguments that are coming in. So how can we do that? We can object entries and then pass in the event.data. And so this will give us essentially an array of all the key value pairs on that data object. And then we can map, or actually, let's reduce over those. So that reduce then gives us the callback, which we're going to put in there. So I'm just going to say callback. And then we're going to start it off with an empty string. Actually, no, we'll do a string like that. And then just in here, say that this is the data received. Cool. Now inside this callback function, I like to just put it on a new line. Not that you need to, but like to. And so the first argument passed to the reducer is the initial string, or whatever the value being returned is. So here it's the data received string. And then it passes in the second argument, which would actually be the entry from there. And we know that's an array. And so we can unpack that away with k, or the key and the value. So it's there. And then now whatever we return in this function is the next string value. So let's just build a little template for this thing. So what we can do is we can say that, I'm going to put a bullet point there, and we can say key is, and then key with value of and value. All right, cool. And then that will give us our, let's just call it message. What's that? And then we will console.log out the message. And the message. Awesome. Okay, cool. So once again, I'm going to turn off the bang symbol, so this shouldn't run. I'm going to invoke the function. Awesome. So we can see that we got our mock that we're using, which is right here. So let's just add some more stuff into there. foo1 bar 1 and foo2 bar 2. Cool. So when we invoke that function, we can see that all the data is coming back, but the logger's not on, so nothing's happening. So now when we change it to turn it on and we run it, we can see that the, what do we got? They only got the last one because I forgot to add the current string, or the new string, to the existing string. So let's just do str plus equals, so that it starts to concatenate that and build that up. And then we'll also add a new line to the end of each one. So let's try that again. And boom, our data received, our logger is working. All right. So now what we are going to do, that we have our logger, and remember, we can use this on as many functions as we want. Now that we have this whole facility, we can just bring it in. So let's make sure that we turn it off by default once again. And now I'm going to run 8-base deploy. I never like running 8-base deploy directly because it's a bad practice, especially if you're in like a production workspace. You should be committing your functions to like a GitHub repo or some type of Git repository. However, when just doing demos and whatnot, it's totally fine. So I'm going to run 8-base deploy, and I will jump back in once this function deploys. Cool. So the function has successfully deployed, and now what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the 8-base console, set this environment variable. So I'm just going to copy this verbose logger variable here, and then test out our function, which we know in this case is running on the user update operation. So I'm going to switch over here to my 8-base console, and first thing I'm going to go is set that environment variable. So settings, environment variables, verbose logger, and then let's start with it just being off, false. So I'm going to add it, and we're good. So now if I go to my functions, here I can see that the before user update function has been deployed, and it currently has no logs. So let's go into our data, users, and for this first user right here, I'm just going to update it to be John Smith instead of Sebastian Smith. I'm going to submit that change. Cool, the row is successfully updated. John Smith is the new name. We go to our functions. We look at the logs for this before function, and we can see that nothing has changed. That's good. Our logger is off. So now let's go back to our environment variable, and for whatever reason, we wanted to say, hey, we want to know what's being passed to it. We're trying to debug something, whatever it might be. Update the environment variable. Go back to the data. Go back to John, Mr. Smith. So let's now say that John is, yeah, let's just say that it's now Johnny Smithers, and his status is now inactive. Cool. So now I save that change. Cool. The row successfully updated. And now if I go back to this function, I can go there. I'm going to reload it. That should be coming in. Awesome. So now we can see that it console logged out all that information. So the data received, inactive, Johnny, Smithers, time zone, all that stuff that was passed to it. Should have gone on the new line, but I think maybe if I passed a string literal, it would have worked better. I'm not sure. However, what's important to note here is now we have that dynamic way of toggling on and off this little function or facility that we built for our workspace. And it's important to remember, if I go back to the function, that I can pretty much do anything I want in here now, right? So if I want to send these types of logs or any type of information to a third-party system, if I want to send myself an email, if something happens or something comes through, I can send it off to Twilio, whatever it is. So I love doing stuff like this because it just really shows the flexibility of working with 8-base. It helped us by bringing a ton of convention to how we deploy functions, generating those functions, the environment in which they're hosted, all that stuff, and I could just focus really on the code that mattered to me. So I hope that this tutorial helped give you some ideas on how you can maybe more creatively use functions to handle some of these like more nuanced use cases. We are actually currently building a logging facility into 8-base, so that would be more of a native solution for this. However, I always just like to remind our development community that anything that 8-base doesn't currently offer, you can build using 8-base, because we are really giving you the same tools that we use to build our platform. We're exposing those to you really in an almost an uncontrolled manner. So super fun environment to work in, and I hope that you found this video useful. See you in future videos.